Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, he was one of the few bright spots for the Democrats in the 2002 congressional races. Maryland Representative Chris Van Hollen returns to talk about his freshman season and the year ahead. In Northeast D.C., keeping a Piedmont musical tradition alive, we go on a visit to the Archie Edwards Blues Barbershop.
Archie had this phobia about electrocuting. Oh, the guitar was a great instrument until they electrocuted the damn thing.
Also, 2 million people behind bars. Saddam's Iraq, Kim's North Korea. Think closer to home. Reuters national correspondent Alan Elsner drops by to talk about his new book, Gates of Injustice, The Crisis in America's Prisons. What's Walmart got to do with that Los Angeles supermarket dispute over health benefits? Lots, says Susan Phillips, International Vice President of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Plus, we preview an excerpt from the forthcoming One Woman The Body, starring Sarah Pladell, and the poet laureate of the Jazz Association, Reuben Jackson, takes us on a journey to Isfahan, where Ellington said, all is poetry. Welcome to the Forum at the Coffee House. The last time Chris Van Hollen visited us here, he was a Maryland state senator and candidate for U.S. Congress in a district that covers most of Montgomery County and a part of Prince George's. He's now got a year under his belt in the House of Representatives and recently returned from a visit to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That trip was something of a return itself, a return to a region the congressman visited as a foreign relations staffer, and a return to Pakistan, his place of birth. Welcome back to the Coffee House.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back. Nice to see you.
Let's start with Pakistan. You visited with President Musharraf when you were there. Seymour Hersh wrote recently in The New Yorker that American military is operating secretly and clandestinely in Pakistan on the side of near the border of Afghanistan, trying to smoke out the remnants of the Taliban that moved there. And the Pakistani press is rife with reports that this is all about an effort to find bin Laden just in time for Bush's reelection, that is, the October surprise. Did you talk about this with President Musharraf?
Right. Well, we definitely talked about the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the importance of trying to capture him and other remnants of al-Qaeda that are suspected to be along the Pakistan-Afghan border, where you've got mountainous regions, lots of hiding places. Musharraf made it clear that they have stepped up their efforts recently in what's called the Northwest Frontier Province. They've asked the United States to provide their troop with night vision goggles so they can be more effective in trying to track down al-Qaeda. And the United States is really preparing a spring offensive now that the winter's over. It's a little warmer in Afghanistan. I think the U.S. is going to step up its efforts with that respect. In terms of trying to time it to coincide with the election, having been in Afghanistan and talked to the troops, I don't think there's anything like that going on. But there is going to be a very serious press to capture.
What about American military in Pakistan operating clandestinely, secretly?
That, I can only base my comments on what you've seen in the American press. There's been some speculation that there are troops there. They'd only be there really at the invitation of the Pakistani government. Whether they're operating in there or not is something I'm not sure of.
Okay. You also talked with Ambassador Bremer, who's the head of the Occupation Authority for America in Iraq, and the United States now is taking the position, has been for a while, that we should turn over sovereignty to Iraq by June 30th. Based upon what you saw when you were in Iraq, the people you spoke with, to what extent would you say that date is a date that corresponds to Iraqi needs and realities, and to what extent does it correspond to American political realities?
Well, that's a date that I think corresponds more to American political realities. It was a date that we picked out of the hat. It was originally part of a plan where we were going to have these caucuses to select an interim government that would take over from the governing council until we could hold direct elections. In my view, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go through somersaults to transfer sovereignty by July 1st, only to have direct elections later in the year. It's a lot of turmoil. It's going to cause a lot of infighting among the different groups, the Shias, the Sunnis, the Kurds, and others. And my view is that's dictated much more by the American political timetable. I think the president would like to create an impression in people's minds back here that we're passing off the baton and we're sort of done with it. The reality is, no matter who we hand over power to on an interim basis, American forces are going to be there in huge numbers, over 100,000 for some time to come. The American financial commitment is going to be huge. So people are kidding themselves if they think this July 1 date, when Bremer may pack his bags and come home, is really the end of our efforts there. We're still very much at the beginning stages.
In the run-up to the war, you were a vocal critic of the rush to war, argued that let the weapons inspectors do their job. Of course, no weapons of mass destruction were ultimately found. On the other hand, Saddam Hussein, his odious regime, was ousted. On balance, wasn't that a good thing?
Well, you're absolutely right that I supported giving the UN inspectors additional time to look for weapons of mass destruction. The administration said, you guys aren't looking hard enough. We know where they are. We're going in. To date, clearly, we haven't found any weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, getting rid of Saddam Hussein is a good thing in itself. The larger question for Americans is whether going to war to get rid of the leadership of Saddam Hussein would have been something supported by the American people in the absence of the president's claims that he posed an imminent danger to the American public through alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction and a claim that he might hand them over to al-Qaeda. Turns out, as you say, we don't have the weapons of mass destruction, and there are more al-Qaeda coming into Iraq now than there ever were before. There's no evidence that al-Qaeda was operating in together with the Saddam Hussein regime. Now that he's gone, there's been a vacuum, more coming in. I would like to say that back in 1988, when Saddam Hussein turned his weapons against the Kurds, this is the end of the Iran-Iraq war, I was a staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I went and did a report about the use of chemical weapons against the Kurds in the north, and we came back and we urged the Congress to pass sanctions against Saddam Hussein. The Senate did it. The House never passed it, and the Reagan administration, including many people who are in the Bush administration today, opposed doing anything. They want to sit on their hands. They did not want to even impose economic sanctions, and that was at the height of the human rights violations. So, frankly, the hypocrisy in this administration with respect to the claims of human rights is really tough for some of us to take. We pressed for action when the human rights violations were at their highest. No one did anything then. Clearly, the president, having not found weapons of mass destruction, has turned to that argument to justify the case. But it's a case I don't think the American people would have gone for, and that's why his emphasis had always been on the weapons of mass destruction.
Let's talk about another national security issue. There was recently a report, Associated Press carried it, the London Observer carried it, that there was a Pentagon study, a study done by consultants on behalf of the Pentagon that projected scenarios and worst-case scenarios for climate change that raise very harrowing possibilities. Severe drought in the next 20 years in China, cities in Europe being completely flooded underwater like The Hague. Serious hit to American agriculture, England having Siberian weather. What's your take on this?
Well, I don't know all the details about the specific study, but the fact that the administration's ignoring the dangers of global warming fits a pattern. I mean, this administration has really become an evidence-free zone when it comes to big environmental issues. We had a report that came out of the EPA that was essentially sponsored by the EPA some time ago, saying, the threat of global warming is real. The major contributors to global warming are the man-made inputs. The administration didn't fit its own view of the world. It decided to bury the report and ignore the report.
The report was by the bureaucracy.
By its own, right, by its own.
Bush denounced it as
right.
Coming from the bureaucracy.
That's right. I mean, right, exactly. A bunch of bureaucrats can't believe, what they're saying. I mean, essentially, you had a energy bill.
But now this is the Pentagon
right.
as the source of this information, not this liberal institution by a long stretch,
right.
Making this case. Is it tenable now for the Bush administration to continue to have its metaphorical head in the sand on this issue?
Well, whether it's tenable or not is going to be up to the American people to decide in November. I mean, they're going to have to look at this pattern of behavior, and along with a lot of other patterns of behavior in this administration. But you know, what's going on with respect to global warming is the same sort of thing that was going on with the energy bill. What they don't like, they deep six the energy bill. They put together behind closed doors. Vice President Cheney, a lot of the oil and gas interests from Texas, put together an energy bill. We're still trying to get access to the information about what kind of discussions took place behind closed doors, because it's clearly an energy bill that just helps one particular group in the United States rather than does anything for energy independence or the environment.
Very quickly on Haiti, because it's a breaking issue right now. The Marines have just moved into Haiti to try to restore order in Port-au-Prince. But many people say this was a good thing to do, but it should have happened earlier, because here was the first democratically elected constitutional Republican government in the history of Haiti, and we basically said to the president, leave the country.
Right. Haiti is a very tough case because President Aristide's rule was marred by corruption and all sorts of mistakes that he made. On the other hand, as you say, he was a democratically elected president. And my view is this administration intervened too late. We should have been involved much earlier in trying to bring stability to the country, trying to organize a different result, because now you have the specter of a democratically elected president essentially being ushered out of the country by U.S. forces when the United States should be standing up for democracies around the world. So I think that if we'd intervened earlier, there's a possibility we could have reached a solution that wouldn't have, instead of waiting for the situation to deteriorate as it has. Now we have, it seems to me, an obligation to provide as much humanitarian relief as we can and provide some stability, because a lot of the folks fighting Aristide are some very unsavory elements.
You're on two committees, Government Reform and Workforce and Education, and from those vantages you've attempted to influence legislative policy, but you are a member of the minority party and a backbencher at that. Tell me about what you consider to be your greatest successes in your first year.
Well, as you say, it's been a great committee for me, the Education Committee, because we've had a lot of bills that we've taken up early on. Pushed very hard to increase the level of authorized funding for special education. Many years ago, this country passed a law, the IDEA legislation, that did a good thing. It said every child's entitled to a good education, regardless of his or her disabilities. But the federal government's never come forward with the 40% funding it promised. I pushed very hard to try and increase that authorization. I was actually pleased to get the new Member of Congress award from a Coalition for Education Funding for my efforts to do that. Getting authorization level is one thing, but now you got to get the appropriations to follow through. I also was successful in getting some amendments onto the Head Start bill that better align the state and local curricula. And I was also active on some issues to help protect the rights of federal employees. And while an amendment that I attached...
These are outsourcing issues.
These are outsourcing issues. This has to do with the administration's effort to try to contract out a lot more federal jobs, and essentially, I think, tip the playing field against
including those of mentally
employees.
retarded cafeteria workers and custodial workers at the Navy.
That's exactly right. I mean, this was a policy that is just driven sort of mechanically from dictum from on high, and the result was it almost eliminated a program in the Department of Navy at the Bethesda Naval Hospital that the Navy should get a medal for, which was to provide individuals with disabilities an opportunity to work with dignity. These are workers in the cafeteria. They were loved by the men and women who go through the cafeteria line, and yet, as part of this policy, they were going to throw them all out on the streets. I was very pleased that we were able to intervene to protect their jobs and to say thank you to the Navy instead of giving them a kick in the teeth.
We're taping this the night before the primary, so we don't know the results, but let's assume that you're on the ticket in November for the Democrats and you're facing a Republican candidate.
Well, let me knock on wood while
All
I
right.
say that.
And in the context of that, the Republican candidate, whomever that might be, is sure to say that we would do a lot better for our district if we had someone who was a member of the majority party. And the likelihood is right now that the Democratic Party will not win control the House, at least in 2004. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, let me say I think we are going to have a battle for the House in 2004. It's a steep uphill climb, but there are scenarios that aren't fantastic scenarios where it is, in fact, doable. And I hope that we'll have some coattails from the presidential election. Hopefully we'll be successful in the presidential election, and that will bring on others to the House. We just won a special election in Kentucky. There's some more special elections to come. But I think it's sort of a strange argument for someone to say we should elect somebody simply because their party is in control of the House, even if the majority party's views in the House may be completely different than yours. Sure, I mean, if you had one more...
well, this would be a Bacon argument, essentially.
Yeah, the Bacon argument, I think, doesn't fly. We had somebody for 16 years who was a member of the House, and I think if you just look at the Bacon argument, it's hard to argue it made a big difference. One of the things we're lucky about in this region is because we have so many federal agencies in our midst, the NIH, FDA, NIST, and other agencies. There's support from around the country to invest in those areas. So we really don't have the Bacon argument quite to the extent of some other districts. Now we have some important local projects, and I've been pleased, even in my very first few months, to get some funding for infrastructure projects in different parts of the county, and grants for early Head Start programs and that kind of thing. And that's certainly part of being a member of Congress. But I think the people in this district, while they expect someone to work hard on those local projects, also want somebody who's going to articulate their priorities and their values on the national level. And certainly, if you want someone to do that, it seems to me you should pick someone who reflects your beliefs and your values and your priorities, and not just simply say, who's going to win the House, and I'll vote for whoever person from whatever party that may be.
We'll have to leave it at that. As I mentioned before, we're taping this on the eve of the Democratic and Republican primaries, so I especially want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight and the residents of the region.
Right. It's good to be here, and it's probably too late to say why the time this runs. Please go out to the polls and vote.
It's way too late.
Maybe in November.
Maybe in November. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Walk to the corner of Georgia and Kennedy, where as a child the sweet scent of newly opened bags of sweet tarts rivaled any raging greenhouse. Then facing east, like the Muslims who live next door, sail on Strayhorn's sumptuous plain of sound until you reach a city more distant than even Sheila Turner's eyes. Isfahan, where Ellington said all is poetry. Just pronouncing it is a first-class ticket for the tongue. Darling Sheila, meet me there. I will shed this winter hat for a fez of many colors, trade my tiny bedroom for a palace if you would kiss me. Just thinking of it is a first-class ticket for my mind.
In 1959, Archie Edwards opened a barbershop in northeast Washington, D.C. Over the years, Archie's shop was not only a place to get a haircut, but a place to hear the blues. Archie Edwards was in fact one of the most gifted players of the Piedmont style of blues, acoustic music with its roots in the farmlands of Virginia.
It was in the spring, one sunny day, when my little girl left me.
The barbershop was a gathering place for musicians from all walks of life, from eager beginners to the legendary bluesman Mississippi John Hurt. They all came to swap their songs and their stories. Archie died in 1998, but his friends still carry on the tradition that he began. Every Saturday, the barbershop opens its doors to musicians who love to play the blues, and to anybody who wants to listen.
In the mid-'80s, I was playing blues harmonica, and I went to the Smithsonian Folklife, Smithsonian Folklife Festival, see Cephas and Wiggins. And there was this guy named Archie Edwards who was playing. And the first thing that came to my mind was, man, this guy's got an ego problem. Because there's two guys playing guitar and he's the only one on the stage. Got the other guy, poor guy, sitting in the back. Well, then a couple of minutes later, I realized that Archie was doing it all by himself. And I said, man, I gotta learn how to do that. So I introduced myself to him and he invited me to the barbershop. So anyway, I was there. We kind of hung out for about 15 years.
I worked all the summer.
Yeah, Archie was my barber as well as my friend. The thing to do, though, you had to catch him before he's ready to play music. Oftentimes you'd come in and he'd have a barbershop, the wall would be lined up with people. A couple of musicians come in with guitars in their hand. Oh, okay, well, I'm finished cutting hair for today. I'm gonna play me some blues now, drink me a beer.
When I first met Archie, he was driving a cab and doing the barbershop. And then he kind of retired from the cab thing. And he was still doing the barbershop, and then it got to be certain days a week it was closed and others it was open. But basically, on Saturdays was when you knew that he was going to close up at a certain time, refused to take people, told them, come back next week.
And they said, Mr. Edwards, I've been sitting here for 2.5 hours. Well, there's a barbershop around the corner, you know, or you can come back Monday, but I'm through for the day. And if you were sitting in this chair and there was a player in there, and I've seen this happen to me. Half your head is cut. And a guy hits a wrong note, Archie would put down the, put the clippers down. No, let me show you. And it might be 30 minutes. Everybody knew you sit there patiently waiting. What we try to do is we try to keep it as close to the way Archie had it as we can. And when you came to see Archie, you didn't have to wait. You just came in to visit. So everybody's welcome. Visitors, musicians. Like I said, we only have 2 rules. One rule is we need to play acoustic music. Archie had this phobia about electricity. Oh, the guitar was a great instrument until they electrocuted the damn thing. And the other rule is respect each other.
Oh, Lord, girl, it ain't right. You got 2 men loving you one more day.
Always to me, it never was just the music. The music represented an aspect of African American heritage, or let's say American heritage. You know, it represents an aspect of both of those. And what you're kind of doing when you come in the barbershop, you open the door peeking into the past. And that part, I mean, that's for everybody. Like you might notice that when you come to the barbershop, I'm talking all this about black heritage and this, but when you walk in there, you see we're very mixed, you know, really diverse group. And that's good, because this is America. You know, I mean, this is what it's supposed to be. You know, everybody, you bring something, you throw it in the pot, you know, and this is what we threw into the pot.
I've always liked blues. I know people who say, well, I didn't really like it, and then later I did, but I never had that. The minute I heard it, I really liked it. When I was young, we used to get this radio station, WLAC, and it was a clear channel station. People all over the United States were listening to it, you know, kids, like listening after they were supposed to be asleep. And they had all of this really, really fine blues, and that's the first place I ever really heard it. And I just liked it, and I've always liked it.
Blues stopped being a popular music, or the country blues stopped being a popular music probably around the time of World War II. However, if you look at, this is just my personal opinion, you can divide blues into two categories. Blues for entertainment, and which is played in Chicago, and that's the popular blues. Then you have the blues that I call for the cultural blues. And that's the front porch guy sitting there with his guitar telling stories. And the old country blues. And to me, it's no different than Irish folk music or Greek folk music, Italian folk music. And it has the same cultural significance as that music does. Country blues, especially more so than even the urban contemporary blues, to a lot of black people conjures up things we want to forget, like Jim Crow, lynching, discrimination, being the KKK, and all of that goes into a mix together. I like to hear, I don't want to hear old slave music, but actually, if they really listen to it, it's not about it's about redemption. It's about, thumbing your nose at, which is probably the only thing they could do at that time. You thumb your nose at the conventions and at Jim Crow. Like I consider hip hop and I consider rap as urban contemporary. It's urban blues. Same stories. And what the kids need to understand is, well, if you can listen to the guys out here now, you can relate to that, then you should be able to listen to Blind Number Jefferson, Son House. They're telling the same stories, and they were the rappers of their day.
I got a wife, sweetheart too. The wife don't treat me like the sweetheart do. That won't do. No, that won't do. You hear me singing, man, that won't do.
So when Archie got sick and they found out that he wasn't going to get any better, then I started thinking, well, what do we do? This barbershop is really important. All kinds of folks come through here, and there should be some kind of way to keep his legacy going.
When Archie died, we just hated the idea of the barbershop closing down, becoming a donut shop or something. It's just a horrible thought. So what we did was we all kind of pitched in and to keep it open, and then we were able to form a nonprofit, and we subsist on donations. And sometimes the barbershop gets gigs for the barbershop. So.
We meet every Saturday at Archie's Barbershop. It's at 2007 Bunker Hill Road in Northeast Washington, D.C. And right now, some of the folks that are regular musicians who drop in and participate in the open jams we have every Saturday, and it starts just about at 1 o'clock. It doesn't cost you anything to come out and play with us. We'd appreciate it if you brought something to drink every so often. But what we decided to do, what we were asked to do, is come out and do some of the stuff that we do at the barbershop every Saturday.
What's the matter with the mill?
It done broke down.
What's the matter with the mill?
It done broke down.
Can't get no grind. Tell me what's the matter with the mill? People been talking all over town, telling me the mill has done broke down. What's the matter with the mill?
It done broke down.
What's the matter with the mill?
It done broke down.
Can't get no grind. Tell me what's the matter with the mill? You can say can't get no grind if you want.
The barbershop is important to me, first on a personal level, because I have a lot of memories of time spent here with Archie, and those are times you just, are in my memory forever. On a, I guess on a historical level or cultural level, to me, this was a place where you really got an understanding of, or you could get an understanding, learn a lot about your heritage as an African American, and especially with regard to blues, or African American, country blues, African American folk music. Most of the guys that were here, they actually lived this stuff.
I'm going up to Pittsburgh, just see that old girlfriend of mine. Yes, I'm going to Pittsburgh, just see that old girlfriend of mine. I haven't seen her since I was a little boy. Lord knows that's been a long, long time.
It's more than a living museum. It's we hope to do some outreach to other places, other groups, and as well as to be here for people to meet and know each other and play music and be friends.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the Coffee House. There are two sad truths about American prisons. Number one, more people are put behind bars every day, more than 2.2 million at the latest count. They include more and more mothers whose children are left behind virtually as orphans. And number two, life in prison continues to get worse. Brutality, sexual abuse, gang violence, sexually transmitted diseases, drug addiction. All these, the most despairing elements of criminality, seem unaffected, unchanged by years of reform. Now the well-respected Reuters journalist Alan Elsner has written a book called Gates of Injustice that takes us inside this semi-secret society, and he's here in the studio. Welcome to the Coffee House, Alan.
Good to be here.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend on this book, and how many places, prisons, did you go to yourself?
I spent about 3 years reporting this book, Howard, and I went to prisons and jails all around the country, probably about 15 or 16 all told, and met all kinds of people, murderers, rapists, guards, wardens, chaplains, you name it.
So you spent, now how many people would you say altogether you met?
It's hard to
lots
say,
okay.
dozens, certainly, yeah.
So this is a big subject, a big book that you've written. One thing that caught my eye, because we won't be able to cover everything, obviously, the number of women now in prison, that increase, is that because women are committing more crimes, or have we as a society changed our assumptions about women?
Well, it's really the second. Years ago, a woman was going to get a break, but now if a woman does the crime, as they say, the woman's going to do the time. And the other factor is really the war on drugs. We are locking up people for simple possession of drugs, and a lot of those are women, and many of those women are mothers, of course.
Right. So in the old days, a woman had to be an armed felon, a murderess, or something of that caliber to be in prison, and these are essentially victimless crimes now they're going away for.
That's right, yeah.
And what happens to their kids?
Well, if they're lucky, somebody takes care of them, a grandmother or a father in rare cases, or somebody, but if they're unlucky, they're going to go into the foster care system, and the women in prison could well lose all rights over their kids.
And they really, really lose connection, and emotional connection, I assume, as well.
That's right, and the statistics tell us there's about 1.5 million kids on any given day whose parents, one of their parents, is in prison, but over the course of a childhood, of course, that number is far, far greater, and the statistics show that if one of your parents, and especially if your mother, is incarcerated, you're going to have a much higher chance of going to prison yourself.
That's what I was going to say. We're just creating this next generation.
That's right. It's the training ground.
Right.
It's
you destroy the family, you destroy the neighborhood, the community doesn't function, and these kids quickly gravitate to gangs, and if they're girls, they're often victims of abuse, and they get pregnant early, and they drift into substance abuse, and there you see the process unfolding.
Yeah, it's a despairing story, as I say. Now, inside the prisons, the women and the men, there are, as you go in great detail about horrible stories, sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, hepatitis, all of this. I mean, life is pretty bad.
Well, women in prison have special health needs, and very often they're not met. I write about a woman, Sherry Chapman, who was incarcerated in California, and she discovered a lump on her breast, and she asked for an urgent mammogram. Well, it took 2 years to get that mammogram, and by that time she was seriously sick, and she wound up dying 2 years ago at the age of 45. And that kind of thing happens in our prison system. But the other thing you have to realize is that prisons are incubators of disease. It's very, very easy to spread disease within the prison system and inside those walls. And then, of course, people get released and the diseases come out and infect the rest of us in society.
Right, and you mentioned the scandal about the blood, the infected blood that was transmitted across the world, really, out of American prisons.
That's right. Blood was collected in Arkansas, and this was going on for about 15 years, and it wasn't being tested for HIV or hepatitis. And hepatitis is a horrible disease that attacks the liver. And this blood was being exported mainly to Canada, but also to Europe and Japan, and some of it even found its way back into the United States. And a woman just emailed me just recently and told her how her husband was given some of this infected blood, and he wound up dying, and so did hundreds of other people in Canada. And the Canadian government had to pay out $1.2 billion to compensate some of these people.
And the cover of your book shows women, the feet of women, in chains. This is in New Mexico, as I recall?
No, it's in Arizona.
Arizona, one of those southwestern states.
Maricopa County, yeah. The sheriff there, Sheriff Arpaio, claims he is the toughest sheriff in America, and he has the only women's chain gang in America, in the world actually, he claims. And every day they go out there and they work in the sun. The day I was with them, they were burying bodies of poor people, indigents who had died in the streets of Phoenix. And they were all chained together. If one of them wanted to go to the Porta-John, they all had to go.
It seems that's got to be a story out of the 50s or the 40s, or, God knows. We should be a generation or two past that.
Well, you would think so, but Sheriff Arpaio, actually, Howard, is a very popular politician in his county. He regularly he's been re-elected maybe 3 times, and he's running for a 4th term. And the people love him because they eat up this idea that if you've got to be tough on crime, you've got to lock them up and throw away the key. And of course, you don't throw away the key. These people, as you said in your introduction, they're all coming back into society. And if they get humiliated and abused, that humiliation and that abuse is what they bring out with them.
Right. Well, so now you spend a fair amount of your own time, not locked up, but dealing with these stories and with these people inside the prison. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel that you see here? What do we do? We have 2.2 million. How do we get that number down? And how do we change the inside?
Well, the fiscal pressures of this ever-expanding system are beginning to cripple people. And there's states like California that just can't afford it anymore. If you're going to lock people up for very long times, they're going to grow old in prison, they're going to get sick, and they're going to need a lot of health care, and it's very, very expensive. So that's one of the hopeful signs, that some states are looking at the costs. But beyond that, I don't see a lot of hope right now unless we stop sending people away for these non-violent crimes and find other ways of dealing with them.
Some alternate sentencing
That's right,
ideas.
yeah. Treatment for drug abusers. Right. I'm not talking about drug dealers, drug traffickers. I'm talking about people who really are only harming themselves.
Junkies.
Junkies, yeah, right.
Prostitutes or people on the street who are just essentially being taken off the street and put on the other side.
Well, there are a lot of middle-class people who abuse drugs as well, but the difference is that they do it in their own homes, and the police don't really kind of bother them.
Right. And that's of course another side to this story. The people inside the prisons are are not the middle class people by and large.
No, about 40% of them are blacks, and about another 15% of them are Hispanics. And that's one of the tragedies. A black man, a young man in America, has a 1 in 3 chance of ending up in prison. They don't go to college. Prison is their college, and that's where they get their education.
Right. Well, this book will be published very soon, it'll be out in the stores, and in the meantime, you can get it off Amazon, and you have a website as well?
That's right, it's alanelsner.com, and there's a link to Amazon.
That's ELSNER.com.
ALAN with one L, that's the most important thing.
That's right.
And it'll be out in the first week of April.
Thank you. Thanks to Alan Elsner for his comments and insights. When an author presents us with a book like this, full of dark and disturbing truths about a part of society that we'd just as soon ignore, the natural tendency is, well, just keep ignoring it. That, of course, would be the worst possible reaction. If for no other reason than this, please remember, many of the people in prisons will someday be free among us. Think about that fact when you read about the harsh reality described in Alan's book, The Gates of Injustice. I'm Howard Cohen, and this has been A Second Look.
I'm obsessed with the body, with my body, though you wouldn't know it from the way I dress. I know what I feel and what I don't. I know what's under here and what isn't. There are things I could tell you. Not yet. Let me tell you instead things that others have said. I mean, that's going to be a whole lot more comfortable for all of us, isn't it? I couldn't ask any of you to raise your hand if you feel a fart coming on, or if your big toe itches. We have been trained to tighten our sphincters when we're out in public, to itch behind closed doors, to keep things to ourselves, to kill only in our fantasies. Yeah, there are others, sure, but most of us do as our parents tell us. My mother told me the body is private. Keep the body private. You have private parts, or for emphasis, simply privates. Keep your privates clean. Don't share a comb. Keep sticks out of your ears. Brush twice a day. And remember to wipe front to back. Remember to wipe front to back. I asked, have you ever seen your parents' bodies? And if you did, what did you see? And they came back with answers like, I remember being offended by my mother's stomach. It was large and droopy. Another talks about seeing her father's naked buttocks. How startled she was at their hairiness. And how, after that, she could never look upon her father's forearms or chest, places she accepted as having hair, without seeing that other place. Those dark and vaguely threatening globes disappearing behind the bathroom door. Our parents appear to us as a dissection, a memory housed in the shape of an arm, force of a sneeze, the bloated tongue, in the mouth of your dead father, that tongue which in all its years probably never touched yours or any part of you, that tongue which you probably only saw as a baby and then too young for memory, only the color registering, dim puce, something which triggered your baby laugh, maybe even something you reached toward and still a baby now tried to touch, but not since then. For the tongue, I'm sure my mother would agree, is private, ugly by nature, coated, furred, as the dictionary tells us when sick, and not to be seen in polite society, and yet it is this tongue, this language, love's original arrow, which now, fat and walnut-colored, fills up the mouth of your dead father, has become your father when someone says the word, Father. When someone asks you to remember.
Hi, and welcome to Work Life at the Coffee House. 70,000 grocery workers in California recently concluded a long and difficult strike. In the days ahead, the same union and the same employer involved in the California strike will face each other across the bargaining table right here in this region. What was the strike in California all about, and will there be a strike here? We are fortunate to have with us today Susan Phillips, who is an international vice president and director of the Working Women's Department of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Welcome to the Coffee House, Susan.
Thank you, Fred. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us, what was the strike in California about?
Primarily, the strike was about health care. And this is an issue that is a prime issue at the bargaining table in just about every union negotiations. What was happening in California is that Safeway was the lead employer. This is, we're talking about the grocery industry in Southern California. And they decided that they did not want to pay health benefits anymore for their workers. What they were proposing to do was to vastly cut back health insurance for their workers. And this was something that workers did not want to put up with. And so they fought back, and we had a strike that lasted 4.5 months.
Well, now, was it just a strike against Safeway? Now, there were 70,000 workers.
There were 70,000 workers, and Safeway chose to bargain in conjunction with two other companies. One is a company called Albertsons, and the other is a company called Ralph's that is actually Kroger. It operates under the name Ralph's. And often in these situations, when you're dealing with an industry in an area, the employers will choose to bargain together so that they can use their collective strength against the workers. So we had workers who struck Safeway, and the next day, Albertsons and Ralph's locked them out.
So this was several employers involved in this strike.
Yes.
And there were also a lot of unions who supported this strike as well, is that?
Yes, the 70,000 workers were all members of the Food and Commercial Workers Union. And the geographical range was from San Diego and south to the Mexican border up to north of Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo. There were 7 local unions involved.
So the strike is settled. The strike is over. What do you think about the settlement?
Well, the strike, there was a settlement that was reached on late Friday, and it was voted by the members. Saturday and Sunday, they voted 86%.
This was in the beginning of March.
Yes, they voted, well, the end of February. They voted 86% to accept the contract. Did we get everything we wanted? No. That rarely happens in collective bargaining. Did the company get what it wanted? No, it didn't. So it was a compromise on both sides.
Well, you said that the strike was mostly, or a central issue in the strike was health care. And we all know that health care costs are going up, and that's just becoming an increasing problem everywhere. How can you expect an employer like Safeway to absorb these increasing health care costs? Don't they have to pass along these costs? I mean, can't they they're a grocery store that to stay in business, don't they have to cut back on what they pay for health insurance?
Well, actually, they don't. We were facing a situation of 3 companies. They're all Fortune 500 companies, Safeway, Albertsons, and Kroger. And their combined net profit over the last 5 years went up $9.7 billion collectively. So we're not talking about poor companies that are on the edge here. We're talking about very well-off companies. Now, what they said to us at the bargaining table is the reason they wanted to slash the health benefits was because of Walmart. What's the connection? Walmart is entering the Southern California grocery industry. And what they were trying to do was a preemptive strike to lower their labor costs, and part of that is healthcare costs, so they could compete with Walmart.
Well, have they succeeded? The strike's over now, and is Safeway going to be able to compete with Walmart?
Well, Safeway still has a health care plan for its employees, as do the other 2 companies. But we don't think that's even the right question, we the union, because one of the things that is true about Walmart is not only do they pay very low wages, but for the most part, most of their workers do not get health benefits through their employer, through Walmart. This is a deliberate strategy on Walmart's part, both the wage level and the fact that they don't want to pay health benefits. What they like to say is, well, most of our employees are covered, but they're not covered by Walmart. They're covered by other companies. They're spouses of other people that have health insurance through their employer. So it's basically a lot of the Walmart workers are on family plans with other employers. That puts a huge burden on the other employers, who tend to be unionized companies in many cases, because companies in the United States don't have to provide health benefits. But almost always when there's a union involved, they do provide health benefits because there's a collective voice that the workers have to say, this is what we need, and this is what we want.
So you're saying that in some instances, Walmart workers are actually being covered by union plans?
Absolutely. We know that that's true. And then not only are they covered by union plans, but in many cases, people are covered by public assistance. I was reading a study today that was put out by the state of Georgia that looked at a program they have to provide health benefits for children of families with low incomes. And this is a state study that showed that 1 in every 4 children who's enrolled in that program is the kid of a Walmart worker.
Really?
And I think that's pretty damning. Walmart happens to be the biggest employer in the state of Georgia. It's also the biggest employer in 25 of our 50 states in the United States.
Okay, but let me ask you about Walmart. You know, I've heard, I don't shop there, but I've heard that they got real good bargains. You can get things real cheap there. I mean, consumers like that. People obviously shop there. So what's wrong with that? It's a store that provides good prices, good stuff.
Well, you always have to ask the question, at what price? And I'm not talking about the prices that are on the tickets. Walmart pays just above minimum wage. And in many cases, families or people that work at Walmart earn such little amount of money that they are below the poverty line for a family of 3. Now, when somebody works a job and they're still below the poverty line, there's something wrong with that. Walmart also comes in and undermines local businesses, and there are stories across the country of how this happens. They come in, they undercut the prices, they drive other stores out of business, and then when they're the only game in town, they'll raise their prices back up.
Okay, the strike is settled in California, but now in this region, I understand that the contracts between the UFCW and Safeway are up at the end of this month, the end of March. So what happens here? Does the settlement mean that's simply going to become the contract and negotiations will be easy?
Well, no, it's not going to be the same contract. Negotiations happen on a separate track here, and the players are different, although the companies are the same. We know that that Safeway is going to take the same initial position as they did in Southern California, which was a really extreme position. They ended up not at an extreme compromise, but they started out with a very extreme position, and relationships have sometimes been okay in this area and sometimes not. We really are waiting to see what happens. We're not sure, but we have been talking to shoppers at Safeway and the other major chain in this area, Giant Food. They are doing.
Now, how would they be involved? This is just Safeway, right? So.
Well, they are doing the same thing that the folks in Southern California did, that Safeway and Giant have agreed to bargain together. And we've got about 24,000 Safeway and Giant workers here in the Washington-Baltimore area who will be negotiating for a new contract. We're hoping that Safeway moderates its extreme positions and that we can reach a fair compromise, because that's always the best way to deal with labor relations.
So there still is a possibility of a strike here?
There is a possibility of a strike here. If Safeway comes out and is as extreme and as rigid as they were in Southern California, there's a good chance that there will be a strike, because people will not accept the destruction of their health benefits.
So we're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, how will we get some indications about how it's going?
Well, there's a bargaining team for the union, and there's a bargaining team for management. Safeway is going to take the lead in the negotiations, and Giant will be there waiting to see what happens. The agreement that Giant and Safeway have is that if we end up striking Safeway, as happened in California, Giant will lock the workers out. There are about 8,000 Safeway workers in D.C., Baltimore, and there are about 16,000 Giant workers.
Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today. We'll be watching in the weeks ahead what happens in this important negotiations between the UFCW and Safeway, which will have such important consequences for our community. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been Work Life.